I never told anyone, not even my own son, that I earned $28,000 a month. He always believed I lived a simple, modest life, and I never suspected that would become a problem. Until the day he invited me to meet his wife's parents, and I decided to conduct a test. I showed up dressed humbly, like a woman without many resources. What happened that evening revealed more than I ever imagined. The words, the looks and the attitudes of those who should have welcomed me with open arms showed the true character of my new in-laws. But the best moment was when I pulled my platinum card from my purse and revealed who I really was. The expression on my daughter-in-law's face was simply priceless. My name is Margaret, though most people who know me casually call me Maggie. I'm 62 years old, and I have a life that few would imagine. As Chief Financial Officer of a Fortune 500 manufacturing company, I've been earning close to $28,000 monthly for the past 17 years. I have investment stocks, a solid retirement portfolio, and enough saved to live comfortably for the rest of my life without working another day. I could easily afford a mansion in the hills, drive luxury vehicles, wear designer clothes, and flash expensive jewelry. But I chose a different path. I live in the same 3-bedroom ranch house I bought 30 years ago in a middle-class neighborhood in suburban Los Angeles. The mortgage was paid off 12 years ago. I drive a 7-year-old Honda Accord with 120,000 miles on it. It runs perfectly fine. So why replace it? I shop at Target and Macy's, occasionally treating myself to something nicer, but nothing that screams wealth. I don't wear diamonds or gold, just simple silver pieces my late mother left me. Not because I need to save money, far from it, but because I learned long ago that real value isn't in the things we display, but in the peace we carry within ourselves. My son Daniel, now 34, grew up believing his mother was just a mid-level office worker with a modest salary. I never corrected that impression. I wanted him to value hard work, effort, to understand the worth of every dollar earned honestly. I wanted him to build his own path without depending on my bank account. And it worked. Daniel graduated with academic scholarships, built his career in software engineering, and 2 years ago married Jessica, a woman who seemed sweet and kind at first glance. I say seemed because I was never quite sure. Something about her overly polite smiles made me uneasy, as if there were layers of artifice I couldn't penetrate. Then came the phone call that would change everything. "Mom, Jessica's parents are in town from San Francisco, and they really want to meet you. We've scheduled dinner this Saturday at the Sterling. You know that place in Beverly Hills?" The Sterling, one of the most expensive restaurants in Los Angeles, where an appetizer costs more than many people earn in a day. My internal alarm system activated immediately. "Do they know anything about me?" I asked carefully. There was a brief but telling silence on the line. "I told them you work in an office, that you're a simple person, Mom. You know, I didn't want to make a big deal about anything." That word, simple, it came out like an apology, almost an embarrassment, as if I were a problem that needed explaining. Something inside me cracked. Not broke, just cracked enough to let a dangerous idea seep through. "Okay, Daniel, I'll be there." After hanging up, I sat in my comfortable living room, looking at the modest furniture, the family photos on the walls, the well-worn couch I'd had for 15 years. Nothing fancy, nothing ostentatious, but clean, comfortable, and paid for. The kind of place someone with my salary shouldn't inhabit, according to societal expectations. An idea began forming in my mind. A risky idea, perhaps a bit cruel, but irresistible. If they expected to meet a simple woman, then I would give them exactly that. I would take the performance all the way. I wanted to see how they would treat someone they considered beneath their social status. I wanted to see the real people behind whatever masks they wore in polite company. Saturday arrived with California sunshine streaming through my bedroom window. Instead of choosing any of my quality business casual outfits, I went to the back of my closet where I kept old clothes I sometimes wore for gardening or house projects. I pulled out a faded gray dress with a shapeless cut, the kind you might find at a thrift store. It had a small stain near the hem that never quite came out. I found a pair of worn canvas shoes with scuffed toes. I pulled my salt and pepper hair into a messy ponytail, deliberately making it look unkempt. No makeup, no jewelry, not even a watch. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked defeated, tired, invisible, exactly what I wanted. I took my oldest purse, a canvas tote bag with fraying straps, and put in a basic debit card to maintain the facade. Hidden in a zippered inner compartment, however, was my American Express Centurion card, the black platinum card, with virtually no spending limit that I used for business expenses. A small insurance policy, just in case. The Uber driver who picked me up gave me a curious look, but said nothing. As we drove through the increasingly upscale neighborhoods toward Beverly Hills, I watched his eyes flick to the rearview mirror several times, probably wondering what someone dressed like me was doing going to that part of town. We pulled up to the Sterling at exactly 7:55. The valet parking attendant opened my door with a professional smile that faltered slightly when he saw my clothes. I thanked him and walked toward the entrance, feeling the weight of judgmental stares from the impeccably dressed people entering and exiting the restaurant. The interior was everything I expected. Crystal chandeliers cast warm golden light over white tablecloths and gleaming silverware. Well-dressed patrons spoke in hushed, cultured tones. The scent of expensive wine and gourmet cuisine filled the air. A pianist played soft jazz in the corner. This was a temple to wealth and status, and I had just walked in dressed like a heretic. I spotted Daniel standing near a table toward the back. Next to him stood Jessica, stunning in a cream-colored designer dress, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. Seated at the table were presumably her parents. I took a slow breath and walked toward them, watching as other diners noticed me, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed disdain. As I approached, I saw Daniel's face change. His eyes widened, a mixture of confusion and embarrassment crossing his features. Jessica saw me next, and her smile froze like a photograph. "Mom, you made it," Daniel said, his voice tight. He gave me a stiff hug. "Of course I came, sweetheart. I wouldn't miss this for anything." Jessica stepped forward and kissed my cheek quickly. "So glad you could make it, Margaret." She introduced me to her parents. "Mom, Dad, this is Margaret, Daniel's mother. Margaret, these are my parents, Patricia and Richard Ashford." Richard was a tall man in his early 60s, silver-haired and distinguished in an obviously expensive suit. He extended his hand with a weak, brief handshake, his eyes doing a quick assessment of my appearance. Patricia, impeccably dressed in designer labels from head to toe, simply nodded, her gaze traveling over my clothes, my shoes, my hair. Her evaluation took 3 seconds. Her verdict was clear in her pursed lips and slightly raised eyebrows. "Please, sit down," Patricia said, indicating the chair farthest from her. I sat and took in the table. Sterling silver flatware, crystal wine glasses, linen napkins folded into intricate shapes, a centerpiece of fresh orchids that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Everything was perfect, calculated, designed to impress. A waiter appeared with leather-bound menus. I opened mine and pretended to struggle with the contents. "Everything's in French," I said, making my voice deliberately uncertain. Patricia exchanged a quick glance with Richard. "Would you like me to order for you?" she offered, her tone the kind you'd use with a child. "That would be very kind," I replied, lowering my gaze. Patricia called the waiter over. "Bring the simple garden salad to start, and the chicken breast for the main course," she instructed. Then, lowering her voice, but not quite enough, she added, "It's the most affordable option on the menu." Daniel looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Jessica studied her own menu with unnecessary intensity. And thus began one of the most revealing evenings of my life. Wine was served, an expensive Bordeaux that Richard made sure to mention. Cost $280 a bottle, but worth every penny, he declared, swirling his glass like a connoisseur. Patricia raised her glass in a toast. "To family," she said, with a slight hesitation before the word that followed. and to new friendships. The pause before friendships was subtle but intentional. It was already clear that I wasn't considered part of the family. I was an intruder, an anomaly to be tolerated. But what I was about to witness that evening would confirm every suspicion I'd had about these people. The initial conversation was predictable. Surface-level questions about my life, my work, my home. I answered everything with half-truths, playing the role of a working-class woman barely getting by. "So you work as an administrative assistant?" Patricia asked, delicately cutting her filet mignon. "Yes, for many years now," I replied. "Same company. Fascinating," she said with zero interest. "And do you enjoy it?" "It's a job. It pays the bills." Of course," she murmured as if speaking to a simple child. "The important thing is the dignity of work, no matter what kind it is," Richard interjected. "And you live in, where was it exactly?" "Torrance," I answered, naming the working-class suburb where my modest house sat. "Ah, Torrance," he repeated, as if I'd said a landfill. "Well, it's important to live within one's means." As I opened the menu, Patricia's words cut through the air like a knife. "We're so grateful Daniel found such a lovely girl. Jessica comes from a very good family. You know, our lineage goes back generations in San Francisco society." The implication was clear. Jessica was marrying down, and they wanted me to know it. The salad arrived. Mine was indeed the simplest on the menu, just lettuce and a basic vinaigrette. Everyone else's plates were artfully arranged with exotic ingredients I could name, but pretended not to recognize. Then, Richard leaned forward with a question that changed everything. "So, Margaret, do you own your home, or do you rent?" "I own it," I replied simply. "Really?" He seemed surprised. That must have been quite an accomplishment on an administrative salary. "I've been very careful with money," I said modestly. "Well, that's admirable," Patricia chimed in. "Richard and I own 3 properties. Our main residence in Pacific Heights, a vacation home in Napa, and a condo in Manhattan, for when we're in New York. We believe in the importance of real estate investment." The rest of the meal continued in this vein. Everything was a competition, an opportunity to highlight their wealth and status, while subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, putting me in my place. "Where exactly do you live?" Patricia asked, making it sound like an interrogation. "Just a small ranch house," I answered. 3 bedrooms. Quiet neighborhood. "How quaint," she said, and somehow made it sound like an insult. Richard and I always believed in surrounding ourselves with the right kind of environment. It's so important for maintaining certain standards. The conversation turned to cars. "What do you drive, Margaret?" Richard asked. "A Honda Accord. Reliable transportation," he said with a patronizing nod. "Richard drives a Mercedes S-Class, and I have a Range Rover for my charity work." Speaking of which, Patricia launched into a lengthy description of her charitable activities, all of which seemed to involve expensive galas where tickets cost thousands of dollars. It was charity as social performance, not actual compassion. Jessica remained mostly silent throughout, occasionally glancing at me with what might have been sympathy or might have been embarrassment. Daniel tried several times to shift the conversation to neutral topics, but Patricia and Richard always steered it back to comparisons that made me look inadequate. "Do you travel much, Margaret?" Patricia asked, already knowing the answer. "Not really. I have to work, you know. Can't afford to take much time off." "Oh, that's such a shame," she said, not sounding sympathetic at all. Richard and I just returned from 3 weeks in the French Riviera. The Mediterranean is absolutely divine this time of year. "I'm sure it is," I replied quietly. But the worst was yet to come, when Patricia suggested something that made my blood run cold. "You know, Daniel," she said, turning to my son, as if I wasn't even there. "I've been thinking, as you and Jessica build your life together, it might be beneficial for you to have more sophisticated influences. I know several successful businesswomen who could serve as, well, mentors, perhaps even mother figures who could guide you in your career advancement." The implication was crystal clear. She was suggesting that Daniel needed a better maternal influence than me, that I, his actual mother, was somehow insufficient, embarrassing, holding him back. I saw Daniel's jaw tighten. Mom has always been there for me, he said firmly. Oh, I'm sure she has, Patricia replied smoothly. In her own way, I'm simply suggesting that, as you move in more elevated circles, certain social skills become important. Professional networking, understanding business etiquette, knowing the right people, things that, well, not everyone has experience with. Richard nodded in agreement. We'd like to help you, son. I have several opportunities I could connect you with. High-level positions that would require relocating, of course. San Francisco has much more to offer than Los Angeles for someone of your caliber. What about Mom? Daniel asked. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. Oh, I'm sure Margaret would understand. After all, a mother wants what's best for her child, doesn't she? Sometimes that means letting them soar to heights we ourselves could never reach. The condescension was breathtaking. They were literally planning to separate Daniel from me, using his career as the excuse, all while sitting at the same table with me. As if I were too simple to understand what they were doing. I felt something inside me snap. Not anger, exactly. More like a cold, clear certainty that this had gone far enough. When the check arrived, Daniel reached for his wallet. Please, let us handle this, Patricia said, putting her hand on his arm. You've done enough already. She glanced at me with a tight smile. And we certainly wouldn't expect Margaret to contribute. This meal probably costs more than she earns in a week. That was the final straw. Actually, I said clearly, speaking up for the first time with confidence, I'll take care of it. Everyone at the table froze and looked at me. Oh, Margaret, that's not necessary, Patricia said with false sweetness. We understand your situation. There's no shame in it. I insist, I said, reaching into my worn canvas bag. And that's when I reached into my purse and pulled out the card that would change everything. I placed it on the table with a soft click. The light caught the distinctive black color, the platinum edges, the unmistakable Centurion emblem. An American Express Centurion card. The rarest of credit cards. Invitation only. Unlimited spending limit. Annual fee of $5,000 just to have the privilege of carrying it. The kind of card that only the truly wealthy possess. Patricia's face went white. Richard's eyes widened so much I thought they might fall out of his head. Jessica gasped audibly. Daniel's mouth fell open in complete shock. The silence at our table was deafening. Other diners glanced over, curious about what had caused such a reaction. I looked directly at Patricia, my voice steady and clear. Allow me to properly introduce myself. My name is Margaret Ann Holloway. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of Stratton Manufacturing, a Fortune 500 company. I've held that position for 17 years. My annual salary is $336,000, which works out to about $28,000 per month, not including bonuses and stock options. I own my home outright, have no debt, and have investments worth several $1,000,000. I paused, letting that sink in before continuing. I chose to live modestly not because I have to, but because I wanted my son to grow up understanding the value of hard work, the importance of character over status, and the dignity of building your own life, rather than riding on someone else's wealth. Patricia's face had gone from white to red. Richard looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Tonight, I continued, my voice calm but firm, I came here dressed this way. To conduct a test. I wanted to see how you would treat someone you perceived as beneath your social standing. Someone without money, without status, without the markers of success you value so highly. I looked at each of them in turn. And you failed that test spectacularly. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. Margaret, I'm so sorry, I had no idea, I didn't know they would act like this. I held up my hand gently. Jessica, sweetheart, this isn't about you. You've been nothing but kind to me. This is about your parents' values and what they've taught you about measuring a person's worth. I turned back to Patricia and Richard. You spent this entire evening treating me with contempt, making sure I knew you considered me inferior. You insulted my home, my job, my life choices. You even suggested separating a mother from her son because you deemed me an inadequate influence. All because you thought I was poor. I picked up the platinum card and signaled to the waiter, who came over immediately, his professional demeanor betraying no reaction to the drama at our table. "I'll take care of the bill," I said, handing him the card. "And please add a 30% tip. The service has been excellent." As he walked away, I stood up from the table. The real tragedy here isn't that you're snobs. It's that you raised a wonderful daughter, who deserves better than to see her parents behave this way. Jessica is kind, intelligent, and loving. She chose Daniel because of who he is, not what he has. I hope you can learn something from her. I looked at Daniel, who still seemed to be in shock. "I'll talk to you tomorrow, sweetheart. Take your time processing all this, and I'm sorry I kept this from you for so long. I thought I was teaching you important lessons, but maybe I should have trusted you with the truth sooner." The waiter returned with the receipt. I signed it, adding a generous tip to a bill that came to over $1,200. I placed my card back in my purse and walked out of the Sterling with my head held high, leaving behind a table of stunned, speechless people. The valet brought a cab, and I rode home in silence, the adrenaline slowly draining from my body. I'd done it. I'd stood up for myself, revealed the truth, and exposed their prejudice for what it was. But I also felt a strange sadness, not for myself, but for what this would mean for Daniel and Jessica's family dynamics going forward. The days that followed were agonizing, filled with a mixture of satisfaction and uncertainty. Daniel called me the next morning. I was sitting in my home office, the same modest room where I'd negotiated million-dollar contracts and made decisions affecting thousands of employees, when my phone rang. "Mom, I don't even know where to start." His voice was thick with emotion. I could hear confusion, hurt, wonder, and something else. Maybe respect. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth," I began. He cut me off. "No, Mom, don't apologize. I'm the one who should apologize. I was embarrassed of you." God, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I was actually embarrassed to introduce you to Jessica's parents because I thought you weren't successful enough. How messed up is that? I heard him take a shaky breath. "You raised me to be better than that. You taught me that people's worth has nothing to do with their bank accounts. And then I turned around and judged you by exactly that standard. I'm so ashamed." "Daniel," I said gently, "you're human. We all make mistakes. We all absorb messages from society about what success looks like. The important thing is that you recognize it now." There was silence on the line for a moment. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, finally. "All these years, why did you let me think you were struggling?" I explained my reasoning, how I wanted him to build his own path, develop his own sense of self-worth, independent of my success. How I'd seen too many children of wealthy parents lose their drive, their purpose, their sense of accomplishment, because everything was handed to them. I wanted you to be proud of what you achieved on your own. I told him, and look at you, Daniel. You graduated with honors, built a successful career, married a wonderful woman. You did all that without any help from my money. That's something to be genuinely proud of. I could hear him crying softly on the other end. "I love you, Mom, and I'm so proud of you. Not because of your job or your salary, but because of who you are. Because you had the strength to stand up to those people last night and tell them exactly what they needed to hear. I love you too, sweetheart. Always have, always will." After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, feeling a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. 3 days after the dinner, an email arrived from Patricia. The subject line read simply, "I owe you an apology." I hesitated before opening it, not sure I was ready for whatever justifications or excuses she might offer. But curiosity won out. "Dear Margaret, I have spent the past 3 days in intense self-reflection, and I owe you a profound apology. What happened at dinner was inexcusable. The way Richard and I treated you was cruel, judgmental, and revealed the worst parts of who we've become. I'm not writing this to make excuses, but I do want to explain. I grew up in a world where appearances were everything, where your worth was measured by your address, your car, your clothes. I married into more of the same. For 40 years I've lived in a bubble of privilege, surrounding myself with people who reinforced these shallow values. Watching you walk out of that restaurant with such dignity, after everything we put you through, shook me to my core. You had every right to humiliate us, to make a scene, to strike back. Instead, you simply stated the truth with quiet strength and left. I've been forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself. How many people have I dismissed or mistreated because they didn't meet my arbitrary standards? How many opportunities for genuine connection have I missed because I was too focused on superficial markers of success? I know a single apology cannot undo the hurt we caused, but I wanted you to know that your lesson has been received. I'm trying to be better, to see people differently, to value character over credentials. I hope that someday you might be willing to meet with me again, on more equal footing this time. I would very much like the opportunity to know the real you. With sincere regret and respect, Patricia. I read the email 3 times, searching for traces of insincerity or manipulation. But it seemed genuine. Whether she would actually change remained to be seen. But at least she was acknowledging the problem. I replied briefly. Patricia, thank you for your email. I appreciate your honesty. Change is difficult, especially when it requires confronting deeply held beliefs and behaviors. I'm willing to meet for coffee sometime. We'll see where things go from there. Margaret. A week later, we met at a small coffee shop in Santa Monica, far from the pretentious restaurants of Beverly Hills. Patricia arrived in simple slacks and a sweater, her jewelry minimal. She looked nervous. We sat across from each other with our plain ceramic mugs of coffee, and for the first time, we had a real conversation. She told me about her childhood in San Francisco high society, the pressure to maintain appearances, the constant competition among her peers. She described how she'd passed these toxic values on to Jessica, without even realizing it, how she'd measured her own worth by her husband's success and her position in social circles. I was never good enough, she said quietly. Not for my mother, not for my mother-in-law, not for the women I tried to impress at charity events. I spent my whole life trying to prove I belonged, that I deserved my place in that world. And somewhere along the way, I forgot to ask if that world was even worth belonging to. I shared my own story, growing up in a working-class family in Ohio, putting myself through state college with scholarships and 3 part-time jobs, climbing the corporate ladder through sheer determination and talent. I told her about the temptation I'd felt when the money started coming in, the desire to show everyone who'd ever doubted me that I'd made it. What stopped you? She asked. I thought carefully before answering. I think it was watching what happened to some of my colleagues who did go that route. They bought the mansions, the cars, the designer, everything, and they seemed miserable, always worried about maintaining the image, always comparing themselves to others, always chasing the next status symbol. They'd traded their peace of mind for possessions. I didn't want that life. Patricia nodded slowly. I'm starting to understand that now. Too late, maybe, but better late than never. Over the next few months, something remarkable happened. Slowly, gradually, the relationship between our families began to heal. Patricia and Richard made genuine efforts to change. It wasn't easy for them. Old habits die hard, and I could see them catching themselves mid-sentence sometimes, about to make a judgmental comment before stopping. But they were trying, and that meant something. Richard reached out to Daniel with a sincere apology, admitting that his behavior had been shameful. Instead of trying to lure Daniel away to San Francisco, he expressed genuine interest in Daniel's work and asked thoughtful questions about his goals and dreams. Jessica blossomed during this period, Freed from the pressure to maintain her parents' standards, she became more relaxed, more genuine. She and I developed a real relationship built on mutual respect, rather than superficial pleasantry. One evening, Patricia invited me to dinner at her home in the Palisades. I almost declined, worried it might be a return to the ostentatious displays of wealth. But something in her voice convinced me to give it a chance. I arrived to find not a formal affair, but a simple family meal. Patricia answered the door herself, no staff in sight. The dining room table was set with everyday dishes, not fine china. She'd cooked the meal herself, she told me proudly, even though it wasn't perfect. Over pot roast and vegetables, we all talked like normal people, about movies, books, current events. No one mentioned money, status, or social position. It was surprisingly pleasant. After dinner, Patricia asked if I'd take a walk with her through the garden. As we strolled among the roses, she spoke quietly. "You know, I never properly thanked you." "For what?" I asked. "For that night. For showing us who we really were. It was painful, humiliating even, but necessary." I observed her carefully. She still looked elegant, still dressed well, but there was something different in her bearing. A new softness, a genuine quality that hadn't been there before. "How has it been?" I asked. "The whole process of reevaluation." Patricia laughed softly. "Terrible at first. I was furious with you, with Camilla, with the world. I felt betrayed, exposed, humiliated. I understand that. But then something strange started happening. I began noticing things. The way I treated people I considered beneath me, servers, housekeepers, drivers, how I automatically judged people by their appearance, by the cars they drove, by the neighborhoods they lived in." She paused by a particularly beautiful rose, touching its petals gently. "I started asking myself, when I became this person, was I always like this, or was it something I developed over time without even noticing?" "And what did you conclude?" I asked gently. "That both are true," she replied. "I grew up in an environment that valued appearances above everything else. But I also made choices, thousands of small daily choices, that reinforced those values, that prioritized status over substance, impressing over connecting." Her honesty impressed me. "It's hard to change," she admitted. "Old habits, old thoughts come up automatically. Richard struggles even more than I do. But we're trying, for ourselves and for Jessica." As we walked back toward the house, Patricia paused and looked at me with genuine curiosity. "Margaret, can I ask you a very personal question?" "You can try," I replied with a slight smile. "Didn't you ever want to show off your success? To show the world what you'd accomplished, especially considering where you came from? How hard you fought?" It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself many times over the years. "Of course I did," I answered honestly. There were moments, especially early on, when all I wanted was to buy the most expensive house in town, the most luxurious car, the finest clothes, to prove to everyone, and maybe to myself, that I'd made it. What stopped you? I reflected for a moment, searching for the real answer, not just the easy one. I think it was a combination of things. Part of it was financial pragmatism. Growing up poor taught me the value of saving, investing, planning for the future. Part of it was remembering who I was before the money, the awareness that that person still had worth, still had value regardless of the bank account. Patricia nodded slowly. "And Daniel, you really never wanted to give him a life of privilege, all the opportunities money can buy?" That was the hardest part, I confessed. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I was depriving my son of advantages I could easily provide. If my desire to teach him certain values was actually hurting him in some way. "What convinced you otherwise?" "Seeing the man he became," I replied simply. "Hard-working, kind, grounded. Someone who values people for their character, not their status. That's worth more than any advantage money could have bought." Patricia smiled, looking toward the patio where Daniel and Jessica were talking animatedly. "You did a remarkable job with him." There was a touch of envy in her voice. You have a wonderful daughter, too, I responded sincerely. Someone capable of recognizing mistakes, of growing, of becoming more than her conditioning. When we rejoined the others on the patio, I felt a strange sense of completeness. We weren't a perfect family, far from it. There were still wounds healing, patterns being unlearned, new ways of relating being forged with hesitation. But there was also an authenticity that hadn't existed before, a willingness to see and be seen without the masks of status, pretense, or social expectation. A year after that fateful dinner, I received news I never imagined possible. Daniel and Jessica were expecting a baby. I was going to be a grandmother. When they told me, over a quiet dinner, at my modest home, I felt a joy that transcended any professional success, any financial achievement. We know it's early to decide, Jessica said, holding Daniel's hand. But if it's a girl, we'd like to name her after you. Margaret. Tears came to my eyes immediately. We want you to be a big part of her life, Daniel added. No secrets this time. I smiled through the tears. No secrets. That evening, after they left, I stood on my small patio, looking out at the city lights. I thought about the extraordinary journey that had begun with that fateful dinner, when I decided to test my son's in-laws. How different it might have been if I'd simply shown up as myself, if I'd revealed my true financial status from the beginning. Perhaps Richard and Patricia would have treated me with superficial deference. Perhaps we would have maintained a facade of family harmony, exchanging expensive gifts at birthdays, attending social events, all smiling for photos while hiding our true feelings. But we also would have missed the opportunity for growth, for self-discovery, for genuine connection that came through that moment of raw truth. Sometimes I thought, it takes a little theater to reveal the deeper truth. As I prepared for bed, I passed by the closet where I kept my executive wardrobe. Hanging beside them, still preserved, was the old gray dress I'd worn that night. I kept it as a reminder, not of the humiliation I'd endured, but of the courage it takes to show your true face to the world, whether that face is adorned with expensive silk or faded cotton. Real wealth, I'd learned, isn't in what we possess, but in who we become, along the journey, in the choices we make daily, in the people we love, challenge and inspire to be better. Baby Margaret was born on a sunny morning in May. The whole family gathered at the hospital, not in the formal, stiff way of people performing their roles, but as real family, messy and loving and present. I held my tiny granddaughter in my arms, this perfect little person who would grow up in a very different world than the one in which I'd raised Daniel. Patricia stood beside me, tears streaming down her face, marveling at the new life we were all welcoming. She's beautiful, Patricia whispered, and she's so lucky to have you as her grandmother. We're all lucky, I replied, meaning it sincerely. We have a chance to teach her something important, that a person's value has nothing to do with their bank account, their address, or their possessions. That real wealth is character, kindness, authenticity. Patricia nodded, squeezing my hand gently. As my granddaughter grew, I made sure she learned the lessons that had taken me a lifetime to understand. We baked cookies in my modest kitchen, read books on my worn couch, planted flowers in my simple garden. I taught her that things don't make you happy. People do. That status doesn't matter. Character does. That the best life is lived authentically, without pretense, without the need to prove anything to anyone. On her 5th birthday, as we sat together blowing out candles on a homemade cake, she looked up at me with those bright, curious eyes. Grandma, Arya asked, using the nickname she'd given me, why don't you live in a big, fancy house like Grammy Patricia? I smiled, pulling her close. Because this house has everything I need, sweetheart. It has love, memories, and the people I care about. That's the real treasure. She thought about this for a moment, then nodded seriously. I think you're right, Grandma Maggie. This house feels happy. And in that simple statement from a 5-year-old, I knew that the lessons had been learned, the values passed on, the cycle broken. Patricia and Richard had transformed in ways I never expected. They downsized from their mansion to a smaller, more manageable home. They became involved in real charity work, not the performative galas but actual hands-on volunteering at shelters and food banks. Patricia even got a part-time job at a nonprofit, using her organizational skills to help others rather than climbing social ladders. One evening, years after that transformative dinner, all of us gathered at my home for a simple barbecue. Daniel manned the grill while Jessica and I prepared salads in the kitchen. Patricia played with little Margaret in the yard while Richard helped set up tables. Watching them all, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Not for my financial success, not for my career achievements, but for this, for genuine relationships, for growth, for second chances, for the courage to be real. Jessica came up beside me at the kitchen window, watching the scene outside. "You know," she said softly, "that night at the Sterling changed my life too." "How so?" I asked. I'd never questioned the way my parents treated people. I'd absorbed their values without examining them. Watching you stand up to them, watching you reveal the truth with such dignity, it woke something up in me. I realized I didn't want to live that way. I didn't want to judge people, to value things over character, to care more about appearance than authenticity. She turned to look at me, her eyes bright with emotion. "You taught me what real strength looks like. Not the power that comes from money or status, but the strength to be yourself, to stand up for what's right, to refuse to play games that diminish your soul." I hugged her tightly, this daughter-in-law, who had become a true daughter to me. Later that evening, as the sun set over my modest backyard and our patchwork family laughed and talked over simple food, I realized something profound. My test at the Sterling hadn't just revealed the Ashfords' character, it had revealed my own strength, my ability to stand up for myself, to refuse to be diminished, to speak truth with grace. The old gray dress still hung in my closet, a reminder of that night, but I rarely looked at it anymore. I didn't need reminders. The lessons had been learned, integrated, lived. As I tucked my granddaughter into bed that night, she asked me to tell her a story. Instead of a fairy tale, I told her a true one, about a grandmother who went to a fancy dinner and taught some people an important lesson about kindness and character. "And did they learn?" she asked, sleepily. "They did," I said, stroking her hair. "Sometimes people need to see themselves clearly before they can change. It's not easy, but it's possible. People can grow, can become better, if they're willing to do the hard work." "Like Grammy Patricia?" she asked. "She used to be mean but now she's nice." I smiled. "Exactly like Grammy Patricia." As I left her room and walked through my simple, comfortable home, I felt a deep sense of peace. I'd lived an extraordinary life by ordinary standards. No mansion, no luxury cars, no designer clothes. But I had something far more valuable. I had authenticity, integrity, relationships built on truth rather than pretense. The platinum card sat in my wallet, rarely used now that I was semi-retired. It had served its purpose that night, revealing truth and catalyzing change. But it was just a piece of metal and plastic. The real wealth had always been inside me, in my character, my values, my refusal to let money define me. As I settled into my favorite chair with a cup of tea, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From a working-class childhood in Ohio to the executive suite of a Fortune 500 company. From struggling single mother to proud grandmother. From woman of hidden wealth to woman of revealed character. And I realized that the greatest gift I could give my granddaughter wasn't money or opportunities or advantages. It was the example of a life lived authentically, with courage, with compassion, with the understanding that true wealth isn't displayed, it's lived. The test at the Sterling had been about more than exposing prejudice. It had been about choosing who I wanted to be, what I wanted to stand for, what legacy I wanted to leave. Not a legacy of money, but a legacy of character. not an inheritance of wealth, but an inheritance of values. And as I sat in my modest living room, in my paid-off house, surrounded by simple things and rich memories, I knew I'd made the right choices, every single one of them. Because in the end, the only test that really mattered wasn't the one I'd given the Ashfords that night. It was the test I'd given myself every single day. To live with integrity, to value people over possessions, to measure success not by what I had, but by who I was. And by that measure, I was truly, abundantly, magnificently wealthy. Every story carries within it an echo of our shared humanity. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone special. Leave us a comment about what you felt, and subscribe to join us for more soul-reaching stories. Because every life tells a story that deserves to be heard. See you next time.